Уважаемые дамы и господа,
Dear ladies and gentlemen,
уважаемые коллеги,
dear
ladies and
colleagues,
gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's my pleasure and honor to start this session. I want to thank all of you to your attention towards the problems of business education. And we have today the topic of discussion that is, I can say, one of the central topics of discussion of the recent decade. It is connected with the present and future role of business school within the market of business education. To call a spade, the very title of the session we borrowed from the materials of SASB International, the question whether business schools are still catalysts of changes and champions of the progress, or whether they are changed by new champions like corporate universities, like different numerous centers, like distance learning and gadgets as the symbols of present-day progress. And I'm very much happy that here we have a number of world-level specialists and panelists who would share their position and their point of view about the development of business education with you. We shall work in the following way. In fact, I hope that this is my only speech. Then I would be very happy to give floor to Sir Paul, the founder of Judge Business School, Cambridge University, and chair of AMBA International, for his presentation. And after the presentation, I hope that Sir Paul, as the leading moderator, would run our session. The session would consist of two parts. First, group of panelists. After the presentation of each of them, we shall give an opportunity for you to ask one question, and we shall preserve the time at the end for the open microphone so that you could participate in the discussion too. So when first group of panelists would make presentations and answer the questions, we shall make a small break. And then second group of panelists who are sitting nowadays at the front row in front of us would come here and we shall continue our discussion. Once again, and at the end we are planning to preserve time for free discussion of the problems in question. And now, with your permission, I want to give floor to Sir Paul Judge.
Итак, доброе утро, дамы и господа. Для меня очень приятно опять вернуться в Ранхикс и на форум, на Гайдаровский форум, который я и вчера присутствовал и участвовал в этом форуме, и сегодня участвую. Что касается бизнес-школ, то, видите, вот самые главные две вещи в нашем названии — это катализаторы и инновации, потому что мы понимаем, что мы стараемся улучшить все то, что мы делаем, все то, что мы продаем, предлагаем, все должно иметь некое зерно улучшения. Поэтому я бы хотела сказать, как мы считаем, все-таки поменялись уже бизнес-школы за последнее время и как они меняются сейчас. Мы здесь почему собрались? Потому что мы считаем, что образование является самое главное в жизни, потому что, как сказал Нельсон Мандела, образование — это самое мощное оружие, которым вы можете изменить мир. И, естественно, мы меняем его именно к лучшему. И, конечно, это должно быть правильное образование. Как сказал Эйнштейн, обучение — это не продукт обучения в школе, но это попытка учиться всю жизнь, которой необходимо научиться. И каждый при этом гений. Но если вы будете судить о рыбе, потом, как она умеет на дерево ползать, то тогда вы можете считать всю свою жизнь, что рыба — глупое животное. То есть надо смотреть все-таки на всех отдельных лиц, именно судить по их собственным сильным и слабым сторонам. Сегодняшняя система образования меняется. Она была изначально...
But now it needs to change because the world has become much more complex and connected. And issues that call for a new way to educate, for instance, are population increase, globalization, resource scarcities, and readily available information. And it's vital that we teach the students so that they understand the world they live in. Because the students now are very different from when many of us, especially in the front here, were at business school or university. Today's students will be unlikely to stay with the same organization for all of their career. So what they need are the cross-disciplinary skills to solve unknown problems in yet unknown sectors. If I go back to when I was doing my MBA, some many decades ago, many of the things we do today hadn't even been invented. Many of the industries that we work in didn't exist. And if it's been that fast in those last 40 years, it's going to be even faster in the next 40 years when our current students are pursuing their careers. So they have to have the use of technology to learn and work, a global and cultural understanding because the world is mixing itself up more and more, creativity and flexible learning, and leadership and communication skills, because so much of it is now about teamwork. Well, there's been talk about, is the MBA still popular? Do people still want to do it? And there are many ways of measuring that. But one I usually use on occasions like this is the number of people taking the GMAT test, the Graduate Management Admissions Test, which, although not so prevalent in Russia, is used by many, many business schools around the world to assess their student applications. And you can see it peaked a little bit in 2012, but it's still running at about 250,000 exams a year around the world. And if one looks at Russian citizens, and these are Russian citizens, not Russian residents, but most of the Russian citizens will be Russian residents, you'll see that there are around 2,000 Russian citizens who take the GMAT test every year. And they're taking that generally not to go to a Russian business school. They're generally taking that to go to an overseas business school. So there is a cadre of people there who are prepared to pay money to go to what they perceive to be a very good business school in a country other than Russia. Another thing we need to be conscious of, especially in certain countries, is the change in the student age population. And defining that as 20 to 29-year-olds, because that's the way that the United Nations does the numbers, China will have a decrease of 34% in the student cadre from 20 to 29. Japan by 23%, Taiwan by 37%, and Germany, South Korea, and Canada, you can see the numbers there. India will have a big increase, and a big country. Israel, a small country with a big increase, and the United States and France with small increases. But in terms of numbers of students, China will lose 76 million students aged 20, or people, citizens aged between 20 and 29. The other countries, comparatively few. India will gain 28 million. So you can see how dynamic the world is for students and consequently for business schools. So let's firstly look at delivering education. And I'm sure this is a picture familiar, especially to those at the back of the room. Not obviously RENEPA or indeed any Russian business school, but it does happen around the world more frequently than we would like to think. So that's not a good model. But we also know, as I said, information is now instantly available from all the various well-known sources, from Google to Wikipedia to Baidu in China, etc., etc. And another thing that's often talked about is distance learning, and hundreds of courses now available in the 4 major MOOCs, the massive open online courses. And they've attracted at least 5 million people who have signed up to those. But more than 90% of them, of those would-be learners, do not finish. And a lot of those who finish don't take another course. Because it's really putting onto a computer what you get in a lecture hall, although you can turn it on and off when you like. So it means the number of people actually learning something substantial from the MOOCs is much less massive than the PR suggests. And the future of education eliminates the classroom in a way, because the world is your class. And it may seem that MOOCs are a good idea, but actually the whole world should be the classroom. One can envisage in some fairly few years' time people sitting something like this, whether in a classroom or elsewhere, getting their own personalized education with their special glasses. So we can see that the existing model doesn't really work too well, but there's no really new model that works very well either. And where we're moving to, I think in the best business schools, is blended learning. We're moving from the sage on the stage, that's the lecturer, something like me today, standing here, reading my notes, you listening, and writing down on your notes. That's the sage on the stage. When I was at Cambridge doing chemistry, we used to say it went from the notes of the lecturer to our notes without going through the brain of either. So we want to move from that model, and the idea now is that the lecturer is the guide at your side, not the sage on the stage. And you learn the basic concepts online, but use the contact time much more for questions and to extend the knowledge. So it's a two-way process, not a one-way process. And adding to that, you have to make it what young people are used to: interactive, experiential, and practical. Simulations and games, living cases right up to the minute, maybe study trips or visits abroad, consulting projects at companies, mandatory internships, actually to go to a company, maybe during the vacations, and do some project. And then a final project that pulls it all together. And those are the sort of where we need to get to in terms of business schools at the cutting edge. I think the second point I'd like to look at is the content of education and how that has changed and is changing. When I did my MBA, it was all about functional skills: planning, marketing, finance, accounting, IT, operations, human resources, etc., etc., etc. But in the last 20 or 30 years, the emphasis has come on human interaction. And most business schools now do teach leadership, responsibility, ethics, teamwork, and communications, which is good. Business schools are still struggling with the next stage, which is stakeholder awareness. Because if you speak to any senior person, even the dean of a business school or the chief executive of a company or a senior person in government, what do they actually do? If you ask them to write a diary, what did they do last week? Well, they didn't do much functional skills. Hopefully they got people to do that for them. They do some human interaction with their team internally, but most of their time is spent outside, dealing with the trends that are hitting them, local trends, global trends, dealing with the government, the media, customers, suppliers, employees, unions, and local communities. And good business schools are now finding ways in which to bring that into the business school. It's quite difficult because the existing faculty tend, not surprisingly, to be faculty, and they haven't actually worked necessarily in all of these places. So it does require a good program of bringing in outside speakers or showing videos of outside speakers, but bringing in the outside world, because no organization exists as we used to draw them in a box. All organizations exist in a very complex world, and you need to understand the world outside, because that will often have more effect on you than, in fact, what happens internally. And the fourth area, which is beginning to develop, is the right brain skills. Because we all have two sides to our brain, the left and the right. The left tends to be the analytical side, which does jolly good at the spreadsheets and adding up and logic and all of that. But the right-hand side is the emotional side, the creative side, the slightly wilder side. And people are now realizing that we need both sides of the brain for a really good leader or manager, because you need to develop both. And business schools have probably been jolly good at the left-hand side, but not so good at the right-hand side. And I use three examples: culture, creativity, and entrepreneurship, which good business schools are now bringing right into the curriculum. So firstly, what is culture? Well, culture is the way we do things when nobody tells us how to do them. We're taught as we grow up to do things in various ways, how to hold a knife and fork, or how you behave in particular situations. And culture is like water to a fish. A fish does not know that water exists until it jumps out of it. And often people who've grown up in one country go to another country and they find it's all very different. And they have to be careful that they don't offend their hosts. Now we have a little saying that in Europe, taking a simple example, in heaven the nannies are British, the cooks are French, the engineers are German, the administrators are Swiss, and the lovers are Italian. That's in heaven. But in hell, the nannies are German, the cooks are British, the engineers are Italian, the administrators are French, and the lovers are Swiss. And so even at that very simple level, you can see that differences do occur. And we're all like everybody else. Everybody in this room is the same, in the sense that we all have basic human needs of eating and drinking and sleeping, etc., etc. But also, everybody here is completely different from everybody else. Each person is unique in his or her own rights. But the culture comes in because we're like some others. This is our culture. We share it with some, but not with others. It may be a national and an ethnic culture, different countries. It may be different employers. It's often said that different employers have different cultures, whether they're very hard pushing or not so hard pushing, or they have a particular approach, whatever. You also find it at the functional level. You know, the marketing people tend to be different from the finance people, who tend to be different from the people running the factory. They form their own culture. And if you have a team of people trying to do something, you'll almost inevitably find you've got people from different cultures on that team. And just very simple examples of the world. These people are all doing what their culture tells them is the right thing to do in the circumstances. And in terms of religion, the map is pretty complex, and you move a short distance and things can change greatly. And sadly, we know in the Middle East and other parts of the world at the moment, religion is playing far too large a part in what is happening in those countries. So that's the backdrop. What's that got to do with business schools? Well, leadership, the need. Because as the world becomes more global, we have to compete against people around the world. And people are the greatest asset for any organization. And whether for a country or a company, whether fighting a war or trying to gain market share, competition is in the end between workforces. And so leading those workforces is increasingly important. Organizations must be led to overcome their inertia and to adapt to changing conditions. Leadership is what gives an organization its vision and translates that vision into reality. It reconciles the wood and the trees. That's an English phrase that it reconciles the big picture with the detail. And it gives the heartbeat to the organization. And as the cultural issues get greater and remote teams become more prevalent, they're more difficult to communicate with. Many organizations, from car manufacturers to advertising agencies to professional service firms, will form groupings where somebody might be in Hong Kong, somebody in Johannesburg, somebody in London, and somebody in San Francisco. And dealing with all of that is complicated. They're becoming increasingly common, though. And they're usually in complex matrix organizations. You've got multiple time zones and cultures to deal with. And they are more vulnerable to weak management. Holding that lot together is very difficult. And Blaine Rushak, the National Director of US Campus Recruiting for KPMG, the accounting firm, said globalization continues to transform the business landscape. This has led to an increased hiring emphasis on college graduates that possess or have the ability to acquire global skills and competencies. Having professionals with international experience gives us a competitive advantage because clients increasingly are looking for advisors who can offer global perspectives. So that's a reflection on where we on the cultural issues. But I'd like now just to talk about creativity, because that is increasingly coming into the business school agenda. And Picasso, one of the most creative people of the last century, said success is dangerous. One begins to copy oneself. It's more dangerous than to copy others. It leads to sterility. And we have another phrase in English: when everything is going well, something has been overlooked. And Norman Foster, a famous British architect, said creativity and arts cannot prosper without uncertainty. An artist is not somebody who just copies another picture. An artist is somebody who creates something, as indeed is a composer of music, etc. And arts have traditionally been a low priority for many schools and other academic institutions. They're sort of viewed as peripheral to the true purpose of education, which is concentrated on the left side of the brain, not the right. They're often seen as extraneous, extracurricular, and expendable. But arts can bridge the cultural divide. That's one good thing about the arts. Playing music or looking at a picture can help people come together. But in the modern world, success requires creative people who can power the knowledge industries. And the acquisition of knowledge is one of the key factors for any major organization nowadays. In Britain, we've always talked about reading, writing, and arithmetic. But there's a fourth R, which is arts. And that needs to come in as well. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and arts. And there are examples of where this is being done. For instance, Alba Business School in Greece, and this is a quote from their prospectus, if you like. And they say, given the change and uncertainty business faces today, managers need new models for thinking, leading, and generating effective responses to their environments. The traditional curriculum of MBA is lacking, however, in teaching approaches that foster creative thinking, risk-taking, and experimentation, all essential to resolving creatively paradoxes at the workplace. The traditional focus on analytical methods and knowledge, reflecting a bias to rational, scientific, logical method, can stifle creative thinking and limit the understanding of new challenges. As a result, there is growing demand for renewing business education by adopting theories and practices from humanities, philosophy, and arts that can break the mold of the typical MBA education. And a couple of years ago, the Lisbon MBA program won the Amber Innovation Award for what they were doing. And basically, they don't have regular classes on Fridays. They have creative classes on Fridays. And they have very creative teaching techniques that challenge the students to get out of their comfort zone. The Friday forums, doesn't matter if it's singing, acting, learning how to manage upwards, giving negative feedback to peers, but doing things that the students are not very comfortable in doing. And whether you can sing or not, whether you can paint or not, doesn't stop you having to go to the class. You have to go and try and do your best and see what challenges you can get to. And the students generally find they're actually much better than they thought they were. And then new solutions to business challenges become apparent when you bring the right and left sides of the brain together. And they have 18 unique events across the year, boosting creativity, leading and inspiring others, communicating in tough situations, and managing your true self. So they've actually done it, and it's had a significant effect on their students. And of course, it is, in retrospect, although not necessarily at the time, it is incredibly popular with the Lisbon students. And the third area, which is really coming into many, many business schools now, is a development of creativity, which is entrepreneurship. Now, this is the classic hierarchy, the management upstairs, the employees downstairs. Organization charts and lines of authority. A boss, the old man, it usually was a man, at the top. Authority generally enough to get people to do things. And success depended on keeping the boss happy. And sadly, that is still prevalent in a number of organizations, indeed some countries as well. But it's not the way forward. Darwin, a great Cambridge graduate, was right. The fittest survive. You've got to keep going, whether it's a business school or any other sort of organization. And there was a book published in Britain about 30 years ago called The Naked Ape by Desmond Morris. And it compared humans to animals in all sorts of ways. But it talked about how difficult it was for our ancestors a few million years ago, living in caves or living out on the savannah. And he uses a phrase that says, in those times, we learnt to take every chance, to seize every opportunity, and to make the best of it. And that is a very good description of an entrepreneur. I'm master of something called the Guild of Entrepreneurs in London, and our motto is dare, create, succeed. It's a real process. But it's not easy. Risk and enterprise. Success cannot be easily predicted. Very hard to know when you start whether your particular new widget or mousetrap is going to be the one that really breaks through. There are hundreds of people doing things similar to Facebook or LinkedIn or Amazon that didn't ever see the light of day. But something worked for those three that they did move forward very quickly. So many are called to be entrepreneurs, but few are very successful. And like exploration, like if you're going to climb a mountain or go to the North Pole, at the beginning, we cannot gauge success. And that applies to all new projects and ideas, not just in business, but in government, in charities, and everywhere else. And risk is an inherent part of progress. We must have risk. If we all did exactly tomorrow what we do today, the world would not move on. It's only because people choose to do something different, to take a risk, that in fact the world moves on. And so although not all those risks may be successful, some of them will be, and the world will improve. And that's why the GNP, etc., most countries, most of the time, keeps increasing. But it's in private business where it's the most important. This is probably the most famous phrase in economics. Adam Smith, 1776, his book, The Wealth of Nations. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love. In other words, people operate the world successfully because it's good for them to do that. It's good for the brewer, the baker, or the butcher to provide the goods, as long as they can provide them for more than it costs them to provide them. They're happy, and you're happy because you get the bread, the beer, or the meat. So entrepreneurs, what are we trying to do? Well, they think the unthinkable. Well, we all think the unthinkable. But the entrepreneurs then actually go and do it. And it's helping students to understand that and to understand the process you have to go through to actually do it, which is so important. And the famous management writer Robert Heller, who sadly died a year or so ago, had a watery analogy. He talked about some people being very happy to go down to the beach and go into the water and paddle, and maybe going up to their knees or even their thighs, and it was jolly pleasant, and they come out again and dry off and sunbathe or something. He contrasts that with the heroic navigator who actually goes for the promised land. He goes, he plans, hopefully well, hopefully lucky, and if does reach the promised land, then will get returns far greater than the person who only just paddles in the shallow water. And the leader of the future, these entrepreneurial leaders, and what we have to teach, will be different. The employees will be different. Knowledge workers will have little organizational loyalty. Whatever your profession, accountant, lawyer, architect, whatever it is, that'll be what you do. Who you do it for, or indeed maybe you do it for 2 or 3 people at the same time, will mean that you have little organizational loyalty. They view themselves increasingly as professional free agents. So in that situation, telling people what to do and how to do it becomes obviously ridiculous, because you've hired the person because they know what they're meant to be doing. And you have to balance following the rules, you still have to have some rules, obviously, versus getting things done and allowing the creativity. And the leader, the entrepreneur, will be more in a mode of asking for input and sharing information. And skills in hiring and retaining talent, something which business schools also don't teach much about, will be a valuable commodity for the leader of the future. And leading across a fluid network in a situation of permanent ambiguity is what's required, but you still have to produce results. And Elizabeth Moss Kanter, professor at Harvard, said this new type of hero must learn to operate without the might of the hierarchy behind them. The crutch of authority must be thrown away and replaced by their own ability to make relationships, use influence, and work with others to achieve results. Now here's a typical group of entrepreneurs, long-haired whatevers. Who would want to invest in this lot? Anybody? Yes, very wise. Yes, because the person, this is the Microsoft team photo of 1978, with a young Bill Gates there in the bottom left-hand corner. So if you'd invested your dollars or your rubles then, you certainly wouldn't have to be sitting here now. So it would have been a very wise move. But even Bill Gates doesn't get it all his own way. Things still go wrong, even for Bill, as does his software sometimes as well. So you can't always be successful all of the time. And so I just tried to give you a flavor of the ways in which business schools are changing, the direction in which they're going. But in the end, it's us to convey all of this to the students. And what you really have to convey is how do they see themselves? Do they want to do the paddling? Do they want to go off heroically? Do they want to be creative? Do they want to be just a functional person? And what matters most for them is how you see yourself for each student. When they look in the mirror, do they see a little pussycat or do they see a lion or lioness staring back at them? And we want them obviously to be more at the lion-lioness end of the world, although not too carnivorous, and still having lots of ethics and teamwork. So thank you all very much. I hope that's got the conversation going. Thank you.
In accordance with our protocol, if you have one question to the speaker. Not yet. In this case, it's my pleasure to give floor to the rector of Skolkovo Graduate School of Business, Mr. Andrei Sharonov.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to be a participant of this traditional conference and Gaidar Forum in general. I'd like to address the same topic formulated in the agenda of our conference and look at the business school. Do they still act as a catalyst for change and innovation? I tried to put all my presentation just in 4 slides, and I will start going through. So business school always definitely responded to current and future business needs, and you see just a short history of business school development. And in the first half of the 20th century, it was the need for the large-scale training of corporate managers for growth industries, and we see this stage as a first stage in the line. In 60s and 80s, the development of management as a science and formation of international management standards, first of all MBA standards, which is in question now. Then since 90s until present days, business management in age of globalization and the development of the entrepreneurial initiative. However, in recent years, the role of business school has changed and now is been strongly criticized, and I guess it would be a part of our discussion today for sure. Some experts blame business schools for a series of world crises, claiming that the training they give to managers causes them to run their corporates in a way that leads later to a crisis. The prestige of business schools and their role as leaders of change in the modern world are not longer obvious, at least for those critics. To remain catalysts for change and innovation, business schools themselves must adapt to new conditions and challenges. Historically, business schools performed several basic functions, including training managers through knowledge dissemination and business skill trainings and acceleration of climbing the career ladder. However, business schools are being deprived of their monopoly in these areas due to the following trends of recent years, and you see these 3 groups of factors which create some more or less serious risks and competition, more strong or less strong competition for business school from sides of newcomers, from new institutions. I will tell a few words now. Large-scale open online courses and education startups are often more convenient and accessible for the purpose of knowledge dissemination and business skill trainings. For example, education startups attract more than $1 billion annually in terms of investment, while business schools just could only dream about such amount of money. A permanent crisis and change of technologies hinder the rapid career growth of business school graduates since knowledge quickly becomes out of date and demand for certificates, MBA certificates, does not increase so rapidly as before. In 2014, the return on investment in MBA training was negative for the first time ever. The practice of my business school, Skolkovo Business School, is proof of these trends. Today, more and more students choose to radically change their career, give up their managerial positions, and engage themselves in entrepreneurial activities, rather than to go further to a career ladder, and has been the tradition up until now. The growth of a Skolkovo entrepreneurial community and the success of one of our internal institutions, Startup Academy, confirm this tendency. How should a business school change to meet these mentioned challenges of the coming decade? Creating the model of a business school for 2025 based on its traditional functions, knowledge dissemination and career growth, which are subject to the destroying trends, is far from the best option. Therefore, my school is trying to address new issues and develop functions which are new for classic business school, such as offering a new life experience and lifestyle to the students. In the recent years, students and graduates of the school have created some very prestigious, very new, but very prestigious form of activity and communications, like a triathlon club, which is very famous in Russia and even outside of the country, and the sailing team, which become #1 among 20 top business schools in the world. Created just 3 years ago, it's #1 according to the ranking by the end of year 2015, and now it's very prestigious. And I see some newcomers to the school. For them, the main reason to be a student, a participant of the Skolkovo, different program of the Skolkovo Business School, to be a part of these activities rather than just getting an MBA degree or other experience. So these sports and fitness classes are a mandatory element of the education programs in our school. In addition, reasonable extreme activities like mountain climbing, sea crossing on sailboats, business missions in China, India, other countries, BRIC countries, are becoming a part of the training. Offering a ticket to a managerial elite of the country is one of the school's most sought-after value proposition. Many applicants come to us in order to eventually become a full member of the Skolkovo Alumni Association, which consists of successful managers and entrepreneurs from across the country. The phenomenal success of the Skolkovo Executive MBA program, one of the world's leaders in annual revenue among all business schools in 2014, is a good example of this trend. Another driver, it's solving the problem of Russian corporations, and it's becoming one of the main tasks of the school. For this purpose, the school founded centers of expertise in the field of education, emerging markets, energy, urban development, and created education programs in a specific format. We call it integrated programs, during which executives discuss team challenges, proposing their own solution and project with our trainers and mentors. Thus, the new conditions require that the business school place their stakes on new tasks and functions that are not affected by the destructive trends. Business education is becoming an area of experiment and solving complex team problems. And just the last slide, trying to compare our vision for mission and for priorities now and 10 years ago when Skolkovo Business School was launched. One of the negative consequences of the crisis is a short-term horizon of making decisions by business and the government. In Russia, in my country, it's a current not more than 1 year, which shut off all opportunities for long-term investment and innovation. And partly during discussion yesterday, it was mentioned here in Gaidar Forum, this short-term planning, short-term thinking because of very severe obstacles and conditions. In such circumstances, maintaining a long-term planning horizon, the ability to address significant national and international issues and propose managerial solutions for 10 years and even more ahead by teaching the skill and knowledge of the future today is becoming a main mission of the business school. So it could be a new idea, a new point of competitive advantage for a traditional business school if we will catch this ability and these needs we see around us. 10 years ago, the Skolkovo Business School was established to respond to the challenges of the time, in particular to form a new generation of entrepreneurs and business environment, to study the specific features of management in emerging markets, including BRICS, or particularly in BRICS countries, and to transform Soviet assets in order to bring Russian companies to the international level. In the past 10 years, these tasks have not lost their importance, and we continue to work on them in partnership with businesses and the governments. However, in the next decade, there appear other challenges that will shape new areas for change and innovation. Developing small and mid-sized enterprises, which may become new champions and ensure long-term growth of the Russian economy as an alternative to the base material traditional resource sectors, which definitely suffer now, and this situation once again proves that we should put more attention and emphasis on these new sectors and new champions. Establishing a charity industry and training successors of big capital, since for the first time in the past 100 years, property in Russia will be transferred from one generation to another. One man just stressed that probably it's the first case in last century, last 100 years, when the Russians will transfer their fortune to another generation, some Russians. But the number of participants of these courses, these studies, is growing in Russia. And finally, improving operation efficiency for state and corporate governance systems in Russia at the area of super margin and growth has come to an end. So, finally, a business school can remain catalyst for change and innovation on the conditions that they change their identity and are transformed from training centers for management personnel into intellectual centers to address long-term national and international problems yet not be solved. Thank you.
Well, does anybody have a question for Andrei? No? All very sleepy out there this morning, I think.
No, probably people do expect more presentations to be well prepared for discussions later.
Yeah, they're waiting for the main people, yes. Yeah. All right, so we move on to Tim Mescon. And Tim is a Senior Vice President at AACSB and responsible for Europe, Middle East, and Africa for that organization. Tim, over to you.
Well, it's really a great pleasure for me to be here, Sergey. Congratulations to you and your colleagues on this extraordinary Gaidar Forum. And I want to thank Daniil and the other students who have been very involved in supporting this effort as well. I bring you greetings from Amsterdam, the home, our home for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, as Sir Paul referenced. And this is an interesting time for me to participate in this forum because our organization this year celebrates our 100th anniversary. And I've just come from a 3-day strategy session with a number of business deans from around the world looking at vision, mission, and value and strategy for this organization moving forward. And so I'm particularly excited to be here to talk about these great challenges facing business schools around the world today. This has been our mission for the past 100 years, and it is about to morph, to change slightly, with, frankly, less of a focus on accreditation and much more of a focus on innovation and improvement in business education around the world. And I'll talk momentarily about that. It's important to note, however, and Sir Paul referenced this, that there are globally today some very core values that we're seeing in business schools, region by region around the world. In our organization, in AACSB, we capture these today as operating in an ethical environment, a collegiate environment, one of civility, where we can have courageous conversations and agree to disagree collegially. And that's really what universities should be, as a platform for this kind of discussion. And finally, a core value is a commitment to corporate and social responsibility, to sustainability, and the role that business schools have for the next 100 years in shaping leaders, if you will, with an understanding of the responsibility that business and industry, in fact, have to creating a better quality of life for all in the future. We announced a couple of years ago these 3 pillars around which all of our quality assurance, quality improvement initiatives would be built. And they are very simply engagement, innovation, and impact. And I want to spend just a few minutes talking about these before we look at some key drivers in business education today. But these 3 pillars, in fact, are resonating well with our membership, which is now close to 1,500 schools, business schools, in 90 countries around the world. So in this first 100 years, we've created this global platform for discussion of business schools, business leaders, business professors, and students that touches communities in 90 countries around the world. And so these pillars, engagement, innovation, and impact, are critical to our efforts moving forward. First and foremost, engagement. And what we see happening at great business schools around the world today is there is a deep commitment to engaging, to connecting, to linking, to creating a nexus between the academic world in which we operate, here at RENAPA, a great example, but with the professional world as well. What we call the world of practice, where people are in fact making things happen in organizations from SMEs to large global corporations. It is the responsibility of business schools to engage with this greater corporate community. It may be NGOs, it may be governments, but to bridge, if you will, theory and practice. And we talk about the importance of each business school creating this bridge, creating this engagement consistent with its own unique mission. Now, with innovation, a topic that is very keen to this program this morning, we talk about how important it is for business schools to incubate innovation, to focus on quality, but not to be so focused on quality that we forget the importance of creativity, of experimentation, and innovation in our curricula, in our programs. That means, for example, that we will make mistakes, that we will not pursue perfection, but in this drive for quality, we will continue to innovate, continue to be creative, and continue to address evolving issues as they emerge around the world. And you'll see that this commitment to innovation is critical because it should lead in the long run to improvements in programs, in courses, and lead to high quality in what our business schools do as well. And the third theme is impact. And this is one that is resonating very loudly with business schools around the world today. There is an environment today that our business schools are operating within that is calling for increasing accountability for what we do. And that means we must focus not only on high-quality inputs, but in defining what our outcomes, what our outputs are as well. And those outputs must have impact on the stakeholders that we serve. It is critical, you will note here, that our business schools are being challenged to demonstrate we are making a difference on the communities that we serve, and that we are in fact having an impact on these various stakeholders. And you'll see it's around curriculum, it's around our degree programs. We're demanding that we demonstrate impact on the research in which our professors are conducting, on our teaching. We see at many business schools around the world connections with community and the work that students are doing outside of the business school in internships and working with NGOs and all kinds of efforts. And then generally, we're being challenged to define the impact we have on the communities that we serve. So these three pillars, engagement, innovation, and impact, shape our strategy, shape our behaviors of business schools as we're moving forward. Now, I wouldn't be a very engaging business professor if I didn't have at least one chart to share with you, one display to share with you. This is not very complicated, and if you will, it defines a very simple phenomenon that is occurring both in business schools and in the corporate environment today. And I call it is about reinvention and reinventing the future in which we operate. And it's a very simple precept that shift happens. That shift happens. You'll note the x-axis looks at time, the y-axis looks at duration or rate, and what we see is the pace of change in our schools, in our businesses, in our lives is increasing at a geometric, at a Malthusian rate. And that's the life in which we live today, one with constant change. On the other hand, the dotted line, you see, defines the shelf life of solutions. And what this graph demonstrates quite simply, and Sir Andrew talked about innovations in education today that are addressing these rapid changes, is that in many cases today's answers will not resolve tomorrow's challenges. And so we as professors, we as business schools, and we are demanding of our students as well to focus creatively, innovatively on answers, on solutions that will address tomorrow's challenges, because as you see, shift happens. And the driver here is that change today is the norm, not the exception. And on the right, you'll see various trend lines, a line that says things are falling but steady, things are rising but steady, things are continuously rising, things are continuously falling. That's the nature of the challenges that we are confronting today. But the delta, the symbol of change, is the life in which our schools operate today. And what was so interesting coming out of this strategy session as we prepare to map strategy, as we begin this second 100 years for AACSB, is an acknowledgement that change now moves much more rapidly. And the real challenge to business schools today is to embrace that change and to be responsive to that change, or we are threatened with being irrelevant to future students and to the stakeholders that we serve. And I thought I would give you some very practical examples of shift occurring and how organizations have responded to this. 2 in technology, 3 in the world of automobiles. The first in technology, one of my favorites is looking at the MP3 technology, which really has been captured by Apple. But it's important to note that it was 22 years ago that the Fraunhofer Society in Germany really captured the creation of this unique technology that allows for the portability of information. So it was July 7th, 1994, when this whole notion of MP3 technology emerged. It was, however, the Apple Corporation which saw this technology as the answer to the issue of portability, which means that they saw, moving forward, we were interested in size, and that we needed to be able to carry, to transport technology and the values of technology in increasingly smaller sizes, but greater amounts of technology. And today you will note that Apple owns 72% globally of this market. They didn't develop the technology, but they saw this as a vehicle in their future strategy, and they jumped on this opportunity, and it's incredible the success that they've had. Second technology innovation that I think is so fascinating today in the world of business, and particularly where small and medium enterprises and entrepreneurs are concerned, was developed by Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, who created this dongle called Square. And Square is this little device, as you know, that allows entrepreneurs around the world now to transact using debit cards and credit cards any place, anytime, anywhere, and gives them the same transactional power, if you will, of larger established multinational corporations. This little free device that's made available to entrepreneurs. But it is a great reflection of disruptive technology, and we challenge ourselves in business schools today to think, well, what in fact is next? And something we can all appreciate is what's happened transformationally in the world of cars. And just three simple examples. Volvo was a revered Swedish brand for decades and decades and decades that had fallen on very difficult times. It was acquired by the Zhejiang Geely Holding Group in China, and they have transformed the brand. That it took the acquisition of a company that was on a rapid downward slope by a group, in this case in China, to reinvent the vehicle, to reposition it, and it's been an enormous success the last few years. Likewise, with Jaguar Land Rover, what the Tata Group in India has done is nothing short of transformational in terms of vehicle quality, continuous improvement, brand positioning, and the success has been extraordinary. And then if we think of the future, what Elon Musk and his team are doing at Tesla, maybe it will be successful, maybe not. But I visited recently this gigafactory, which is nearing completion, which will be the largest battery manufacturing facility on the planet. And Musk and the team at Tesla is betting that these batteries will be the future of electric power moving forward. Will it be successful? Nobody knows. Will Google acquire it? Will Apple acquire it? Nobody knows. But Musk is disruptive. If you have not yet seen the new model of their SUV, it's extraordinary. And I've been to the manufacturing plant in Tilburg, which surprised all of Europe, and it's extraordinary. So shift happens. Our challenge in business schools is to focus on constant reinvention, and how do we become a catalyst to support this? Really, 7 drivers in today's global business school landscape. The first is to challenge our business schools to work what we say outside the lines in a non-traditional way. I've given some examples of this. Global partnerships, alliances, programs have become very important in business schools today. I just visited the Solvay Business School in Brussels. They've launched a new graduate program called QTEM, which is Quantitative Techniques in Economics and Management, with global partners around the world. There are other great global networks like the Yale Global Network and many, many others that are linking business schools globally and providing students with extraordinary experiences. The role of internships today. Sir Paul mentioned it. It is critical in positioning business schools. I gave an example for GE. GE brings in 3,200 interns from business schools every year into the corporation and hires 70 to 80% of them. So it's an extraordinary linkage we have with that world. The second landscape descriptor is our competitive industry, competitive positioning. What's happening out there? The world of corporate universities, by some counts, there are between 2,000 to 3,000 corporate universities around the world. They are competing with our business schools. They are providing alternative products, alternative programs to our schools. It is critical that we acknowledge that and we see what is it that we're not doing and how can we more aggressively participate in those markets. Very strong performance in challenging times. There was a dip in MBA enrollments around the world. They have stabilized, and now we see them starting to climb. But across Europe, what we saw, in place of many MBA programs in the short term, was a rapid growth of Masters in Management programs. Very successful, innovative, creative initiatives along specific verticals to give pre-experienced students a leg up as they look for a unique career opportunity. And then that would be complemented a few years later, perhaps, with the MBA program. And so I gave some great examples of European leaders in these MIM programs, St. Gallen, HEC in Paris, ESSEC, and great now growth, a new spurt in MBA programs globally as they continue to evolve and morph. We heard a lot about innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship. There was a gift announced last week in the United States, $100 million from a family to Florida State University to create a school of entrepreneurship. $100 million private gift to support a school of entrepreneurship outside of the business school. So a very interesting transformation occurring. There's been discussion about innovation, successes and failures, and this is the evolution of face-to-face instruction to online instruction to blended instruction. And that pendulum continues to swing. 3 weeks ago, I went to visit the Open University in the UK, where their business school serves 41,000 students online. And yet they've layered on face-to-face, blended activities because their students are demanding it. The sixth real change in the global landscape is this challenge not to rest on past successes. So what are we seeing today? Big initiatives in big data, in analytics, right? Very exciting arena for students in business schools and professors. And I've seen very important initiatives at Imperial, at Erasmus, at BI, at IE, at North Carolina State, at Judge. Fascinating what's happening out there in big data and that how it's resonating with companies. And we're seeing the future of successful positioning in many organizations is really about understanding data through sophisticated analytics, and that world will continue to challenge business schools moving forward. And then to remember again that the landscape is defined by change as the norm, not the exception. So our challenges today are not many, but they are dramatic. We are encountering today what we would define as permanent whitewater, turbulence in the business school environment. We must be innovative. It is a responsibility of our leaders to drive change in our business schools. Today, it is about strategic agility. What defines great business schools globally today is we must be fast, focused, ferocious, and agile. Agility means some things work, but when they don't work, we get rid of them and we try something new. And it's very difficult in a university environment to do that. Because once we've started something, we never like to get rid of it. And yet the resources are not available to continue sustaining mediocre programs. And then, of course, it's about how well we execute. And so I would leave you with these 8 attributes of business school leadership today. Number 1, it's all about innovation and creativity. And we must leverage all of our stakeholders, our professors, our students, our alumni, the corporate community, to drive innovation in our programs. If we remain status quo, it will be terminal. We will find ourselves out of business. Many of you know there are an incredible number of mergers among business schools around the world today, and those are not done. And those mergers are occurring for many, many reasons, but a lot is the result of this rapidly changing landscape. The old model was it was all about size. It was all about girth. Big always beats small. The new model, fast beats slow. It's not so much size. It's about responsibility, adaptability, innovation, and creativity. We must today be client-centered. In terms of skills, young people today, what we call generations Y and Z, generations Y and Z, and we will have students enrolling at our universities this fall, later this year, who were born in 1998. I mean, it tells you how rapidly change is occurring. And what these generations Y and Z want, they want skills. And if they can get those skills outside of our business schools, they won't come to our business school. I just visited a company that globally delivers coding courses around the world, computer coding, and they've refined and developed a seminar, Coding in 1 day. Coding in 1 day. And their enrollments are enormous because coding is one of those skill sets many of our schools don't offer. Students want it. And if they can get it outside of the business school, that's where they'll go. Number 7, it's about transformational leadership. And then, of course, the power of teams. And I referenced Katzenbach's work. It's critical how we focus on the wisdom of teams and cross-functional work within our business schools. Because no vertical, no particular area will be successful on its own without working, without collaborating with others. And so I would ask you to think about this as we move forward, this notion of innovations that inspire. This has been a theme of ours this year at ACSB. We need to think about the way we create, the way we teach, the way we connect, and the way we lead. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today and look forward to interaction, questions, and dialogue. Thank you very, very much.
All right. Well, Tim, thank you very much. Any question? Right.
Traditionally not.
Traditionally not. All right. Well, we now welcome Michael Page, who's the provost of Bentley University in the United States. Michael.
Thanks, sir.
Nothing. Good morning, all. I guess it's tough to follow on from Tim, so let me start by saying I'm 1 year younger than he is. Bentley University started in 1917. So anything I say that you think is silly, just attribute it to youth. What I wanted to talk about a little bit is not about whether my business school will survive, and not about whether your business school would survive. I hope both do. But it's really not, that's not what I understood the mandate of this talk was about. I understood the mandate of this talk was about whether business schools are catalysts for innovation and change. And my answer, quite simply, is not going to take 12 minutes. It is yes, they are, and no, they aren't. That's it. I guess I need to expand on that a little bit and talk a little bit about why I think we are catalysts for change, and then talk about why I think we're not. My answer is yes, because I believe business schools make a far greater positive contribution to economic and social development than the bad press we get sometimes suggests. That's why I think we do. My answer is no, because I believe that the primary catalysts for change are not, and innovation, are not the business schools. They are the graduates that come out of our institutions. And I think we have an enormous amount to be proud of in what those graduates have produced. I know the business press and the popular press generally likes the short anecdote, likes the caption, and will continue to reel out the names of those that dropped out of universities and became enormously successful as a justification for why universities are doing the wrong thing. But if universities are going to be catalysts for change, if they're going to produce the kind of graduates that are going to go out and make a difference, are going to look for new ways of doing things, whether we're business schools or engineering schools or medical schools, we're going to have to create the kind of exciting environments that challenge our students, excite the interests of our students, and yes, occasionally confront a student who says, hell no, this isn't what I'm looking for. You've stimulated so much in my head, I intend to go off right now and do something with it. And maybe I'll come back to you later on. Maybe I'm just going to spend the rest of my life as a college dropout with a wonderful big yacht sailing around the Mediterranean someday. That's fine. That's absolutely fine if the seeds of that inspiration happened inside a university, inside that environment of excitement and ideas. So let me talk a little bit about the bad press. I think we receive a lot of bad press as business schools because of the desire for sound bites and scapegoats. We like short things. And I think we're an easy target. We're an easy target, I believe, in part because we haven't done the best job in the world of defending ourselves. We haven't done the best job in the world of talking about the great things that business schools do, of talking about the networks we do seed. If you think, whenever you think about technology and we think about innovations, what we focus on is the science. That's what fascinates us. When we think about the innovation that is the glass of our mobile phones or our iPads or whatever it is, it's the glass that we can touch and move around that fascinates us. Well, the glass was the design issue. The glass was the creative element. But it took an amazing amount of management and leadership and transforming that great idea into the product that got invested in so many devices around the world and fundamentally changed how we do things. And that transformation process needed managers and leaders. It needed people who understood organizational design, who could bring people together, the creative and the less creative, the interdisciplinary and the functional. Bring them together in a way that can turn the idea into a reality. When we watch the Olympics shortly, and we're absolutely fascinated by all those people, very, very tall people these days, who dive in swimming pools wearing these amazing swimming outfits. What fascinates us is the biomimicry that turned shark skin into a swimming suit. But the biomimicry wasn't enough. It needed the design, the implementation, the management, all those processes that ultimately produced the product that those athletes use today. That's what we're about at business schools. We're part of that process, and I think we should be proud of it. One of the speakers mentioned the concern and the accusation hurled at business schools about the financial crises of 2008 and beyond, and the sort of press that came along that held us culpable for that. Well, I don't believe we were totally culpable. Let me say this. If we were culpable, then we are not irrelevant. If we were culpable for the financial difficulties, then we were culpable for the design of all those instruments that came apart. I'm not saying that's good innovation, but certainly we can't be both irrelevant and responsible for what took place. The popular interpretation, which I don't believe is exactly what Mintzberg meant, but the popular interpretation of the fact that you can't teach management, you have to learn management. You can't learn management in business schools, you learn management in life. Well, if we accept that as a reality, then we should stop criticizing business schools for not teaching what we say you can't teach. We should rather be turning around and saying to companies, why are you not doing a better job of taking what we can teach and putting it into an experiential program in the early part and in the continuing part of a career that will develop what is taught into the kind of experiences, exposures, engagement that produce the leaders and the champions of tomorrow that you're looking for. So I believe we do a great deal. I certainly agree with Tim that we should not rest on our laurels, that we should not be complacent. I also believe, and I can remember probably the first time I came here, or maybe a few years before that, to this conference, when people said, do you know how many business degree granting institutions around the world there are? People would say about 15,000. We ask the question today and we say north of 20,000, maybe 22,000. Well, I don't know why these institutions are springing up if we are not serving a social need. And the social need we are serving is a need crying out for talent, managerial and leadership talent, that can deliver in the fast transforming world that Tim described. So, let's think about a few things that I think we need to understand about what we are as business schools in our many, many forms. First, as I've already indicated, I think that our major transformative element in bringing innovation to markets happens through our graduates. And we need to give a lot of attention to the education and the experiences that we give those graduates. They are the influencers and leaders of tomorrow. Second, the debate about academic literature and its irrelevance. I am certainly not trying to suggest that everything that comes out in an academic journal is worthwhile. But what I am suggesting is that the way the debate currently operates continues to separate research from education. Yes, I know very, very few business professionals read academic journals. But what I do know is that a lot of academics read academic journals, and those academics, if they are the kind of teacher scholars that we want, go into the classroom and interpret their insights and the insights they've gained from other academics through those journals into a knowledge set that is understood by our students. And when I say understood by our students, understood for the fragile part answer that it is. Because what we know in this complex world, and I think it was Miller, when talking about capital structure, made this argument, is the thing we most know about capital structure, how we finance firms, is that there's more we don't know than that we do know. And I think if we want students to go out, our graduates to go out and be part of that innovation agenda, the best thing we can give them is not just a knowledge set, but a critical sense of the limitations of that knowledge set and what they need to do to continue to learn and discover and inquire. That is what we should be about, not about canned knowledge. Third, we talk a lot in companies, in the industry, and in business schools in particular about lifelong learning. Well, if we're going to talk about lifelong learning and we truly believe in lifelong learning, then we have to acknowledge that there never is a finished product. In other words, we shouldn't be surprised that the graduates of our programs don't have all the answers, don't have all the skill sets that they're going to need for their lives. Because the new world order, the new complexities, the new rate of change means that we've got to create engines of self-learning. Individuals who are never satisfied that they know enough, but who truly understand the limitations of their knowledge and what they need to take that further. The fourth thing, and this please understand, and for those of you who don't know my accent, it is a South African, not an American accent, but we need to, in business schools, and I would argue in universities more broadly, is return to discomfort. And this is something I've felt recently in the US, and it's a very difficult thing to talk about. But in the US, there is a wave going through the tertiary education sector that speaks about safe places and concerns for microaggression. Now, what are safe places? This is where there have been, generally they've related to diversity issues, but there have been concerns expressed on campus about students who feel that the environment is not safe. They are marginalized. Their difference is pointed out to them in ways that are inappropriate. Yes, I do agree that in some sense students should feel safe. But they should feel safe to challenge. They should feel safe to inquire. And of course, they should feel safe from unnecessary harassment. I accept that. But if we try and create such a sterile environment of safety, how do we encourage learning for an increasingly complex world? This bothers me as a provost. The second thing is this notion of microaggression. I don't know if you've heard this word in this part of the world, but this is something that's sweeping the US. And the notion of microaggression is, I am offended if I feel offended, and you should not make me feel offended. Now, I'm going to give you what I think is a wonderful illustration that appeared, I think it was in the Chronicle of Higher Education a few years ago. This was a student who was a student of color who was sitting in a library. There was another student sitting in the same library. I can't remember if it was in Columbia or Chicago, one of those two places, and was reading a book in the library that had been written about a protest that happened at the University of Notre Dame against the Ku Klux Klan. I'm sure some of you have heard of the Ku Klux Klan, an extreme racist right-wing organization. The cover of this book had a picture of the Ku Klux Klan on it, and they used to wear sort of sheets with holes cut in for eyes. The student who was sitting, looking at the student who was reading this book, felt aggrieved. They were confronted with something that caused them emotional distress. The cover of the book. And they went to the university's diversity office. The student who was reading the book was found guilty of microaggression. I am in no way, as a South African, trivializing the harm that discrimination causes. But if we get to the situation where we cannot have these kind of rich debates, we cannot create an environment for difference and an environment in which we develop the skills for innovation. Fifth, the pressure to homogenize. And however they try to defend themselves, and here I've got to be careful that Tim doesn't throw something at me. But rankings and accreditation bodies do cause homogenization. They do drive us down the same funnel, whether they intend to or not. When we as business schools or as universities pursue excellence, and we look for external signals of excellence, whether that's ranking or whether that's accreditation, we then start conforming to what is expected. What I find quite interesting, and there's a very notable, originally British-based, I suppose you might describe, newspaper publication that ranks business schools. We can read countless articles in the education editions of that will talk about the problems of an over-fixation on short-term profitability. And we all go, yay, we should not be focusing on short-term profitability. Tell me why that same publication persists in saying the most important criteria that determines the quality of a business school is salary and salary progression straight out of your education. What are we trying to do? This is a real challenge. Accreditation bodies and conferences like this. One of the reasons why I'm thrilled to be here is because I like to believe, I'm probably flawed here, that it's a signal of the perception of the quality of my institution. And when we look at accreditation documents and we read the press about business schools, what do we read about? We read about the famous brands and what they're doing. There's very little written in a meaningful way about the enormous diversity of education approaches and research approaches that take place in different schools. The final point I want to mention in this context is I want to again point out, and probably because my role has shifted, I started off in academia, or certainly in management education, at an MBA school. Did my MBA, taught MBAs, etc., etc. And now I'm in a different role. What bothers me a lot these days, probably because of my role, is when we talk about business schools and what business schools do, whether it relates to ethics, whether it relates to innovation, whether it relates to sustainability, we move, boom, like lightning, to what's going on in the MBA program. MBAs represent a very, very small percentage of the people that flow through business schools around the world. They do a variety of courses, they do a variety of programs. I think the bulk of them are actually undergraduate students rather than graduate students, and then we have an enormous number of executives. I don't question that there are deficiencies in some, if not many, MBA programs. But deficiencies in the program that doesn't meet all the requirements of a business school doesn't mean a total deficiency in the entity that is the business school. Because some of your faculty are engaging with stakeholders, with externals, with other people, both inside the university and outside, in very different ways. So let me turn a little bit to the AACSB. I am on the board of the AACSB at the moment, so I work quite a lot with Tim, and I am very proud of that involvement. I think it has done wonders for my school, it has done wonders for me, and I think it will do wonders for you if you engage with them. There was a report that the AACSB produced in 2010 that I think is really worth reading if you're concerned about innovation and if you want to think about what schools need to do to pursue innovation. And what I most liked about the report is it kicks off defining what innovation is. Because this is a word we throw around. And we use it, and we use entrepreneurship, and we use small business, and we use all these things as if they're synonyms. And they're not. We know that. So when we think about innovation, what do we have to think about? Well, the first thing is we need to acknowledge that innovation is not purely motivated by the pursuit of profit. I don't know that when the group of youngsters that you mentioned, or when Steve Jobs was working in his garage trying to design small computers, that profit was in his head at all. These were young people trying to do something different. The fact that they became enormously wealthy was a byproduct of a passion to discover and do something new. So innovation is not purely motivated by the pursuit of profit and competitive advantage. The second one, innovation is not synonymous with entrepreneurship. Of course, these two overlap significantly, but they are not the same thing. We might argue that entrepreneurship is about people developing new organizations and new forms to deliver products and services that may or may not be innovative. Innovation is about developing new products and services that may come from entrepreneurial businesses or large enterprises. So there's an overlap, but they're not the same. And then the next thing, and I think the most important one for us to remember as business schools, is that innovation involves management and organizational change. I come back to that illustration that I made of the swimming costumes that we're going to be seeing at the next Olympics. Our role as business schools, as conveners of the multiple stakeholders that are involved in innovation, in transforming societies, we play that role. But we also look at organizational design and management and leadership practices that are necessary and that need to evolve in order for these ideas to reap full benefit for our societies. So yes, I do believe our students at business school should get involved in creative projects, painting, theater, whatever. But not to turn them into the science innovator, but rather to give them a better understanding of the innovator or the creative minds that they have to work with, to take their knowledge, to take their insight, and then transform it into that ultimate deliverable. This is a role that our graduates play. I think another role that our graduates play is we recognize more and more that through these devices that I can't escape from in front of me here, is that knowledge and all these great ideas are almost instantly available. You made the point about the MP3 technology. All these scientific ideas flood our minds on a continual basis. Our graduates have to have the ability to bring together the human resources from all these disconnected areas and disconnected part of the globe and see how these can come together in the development of those innovative products and services that our societies need so desperately. That's what we need to do. That's the kind of environment we have to try and create in our business schools. And we create it, and I would be going through many of the things that Tim's already mentioned, but we create it through doing a number of things. So let me just describe them. It's a slightly different take on what Tim mentioned. We need to blend the concept of innovation, the concept of management, the concept of organizational design across markets. We need to recognize that innovation also involves doing seemingly ordinary things differently. We shouldn't allow the sort of popular press, the desire for our students to go out and be the next Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, to blind us to the reality that most of our students go out and make small, incremental, innovative adjustments. And those are good, and those are functional, and those have purpose. We need to focus on that in the management sense and in the leadership sense. We need to develop the skills that support innovation and not just be focused on knowledge transfer. And this point has been made. Those skills are being able to work across teams, being able to cope with diversity, being tolerant of what seems intolerable at times because it is so different. I thought Sir Paul's picture of heaven and hell spoke volumes to me, because we need to be comfortable with these different talents that come together, sometimes culturally, sometimes unique in an individual. We need to be conveners. And when I say that, and this point has been made, business schools need to be conveners. They need to be conveners of faculties across their institutions, academic institutions, whether it's science and engineering, whether it's medicine, whatever. They need to do this work. But we also need to be the conveners that bring others into the frame. The one thing we have as business schools, as much as we knock ourselves for our siloed thinking, as much as our faculty are siloed, we are fundamentally the transdisciplinary faculty of universities. We are the ones who develop students who go out and work in all these disparate areas, as opposed to civil engineering schools that produce graduates who go in civil engineering, medical schools that produce graduates that go into medicine. We produce graduates that go everywhere. That makes us ideal conveners. And then the last point I want to make, or maybe the second last point, is as we think about innovation, I think we're going to, and our role in innovation and the role of our graduates in innovation, I think it's very important that we add the word responsible as a prefix to innovation. Responsible innovation has to be what we're about. I have no doubt that Angry Birds was a great innovation. I have no doubt that certain people got very, very wealthy making Angry Birds. I am not sure that has improved the lot of our lives, sitting on a train or watching people fire birds at buildings or whatever they fire them at. This is not a responsible innovation. You may say it's irresponsible. It's neither responsible nor irresponsible. But there is a lot of innovation that takes place. And really it's going to be the role of the leaders that we produce to think deep and hard about the intended and unintended consequences of that innovation. When I did engineering as a young man, I always presumed engineering, I did construction engineering, was just a science. I built bridges. Where's the ethics in that? You build a bridge, a car goes over a bridge, or a train goes over a bridge, or a boat goes under a bridge. What's the problem? Well, I met a very good philosopher who's at the University of Delft many years ago. He's written a great book on responsible innovation, and he gives the illustration, if you're ever in New York and you go down to the waterfront in New York, you'll go under a lot of bridges that were built, I think, in the early 1900s by a very famous engineer in New York. What we know with hindsight is that that engineer was a profound racist. Those bridges were deliberately built to have low arches so public transport, buses, couldn't get under them to take people from the inner city to the waterfront. There is an ethical dimension to the building of a bridge. It's going to be up to our graduates to think through those issues with the innovations we create. Our phones have become wonderful devices, and there's probably not a parent in this room who isn't worried about their youngest child and how this device can be helpful but can be enormously long-term harmful if used inappropriately by a child who hasn't thought through the consequences of that instant picture you can take and fire off to a mate that you think is highly amusing. The final thing I would say in closing is that I believe it's incumbent upon all of us in business schools and universities to do a lot more advocacy for what we're doing right. And I say that in the full awareness that that cannot lead to complacency. But I do believe business schools are playing an important role as catalysts of innovation and change. Thank you.
Well, Mike, thank you very much. I'm going to be brash enough to ask if there's a question. No? Yes, good Lord. Sir, at the back. Oh, we got the man at the front. We'll have to have two questions.
Добрый день.
Good morning. I will... Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me, sir? Good morning. 1, 2. My name is Sergey Petrov. I'm from the steel company in. It looks like.
Да, можно перевести прямо вслух, чтобы. Угу.
Checking the translation. 1, 2, 3, 4. My name is Sergey Petrov, the steel company region. Here is my question. Today, we are speaking about the business schools and a little bit about the corporate education. What is your take, and what are advantages and disadvantages in the kind of education when a company invites a consultant, a business coaches and trainers, and teachers, instructors, right to their production site, and as they go in the manufacturing process, they do kind of on-the-job training and they sort specific tasks right on the spot. Do you think it's a very promising type of training, or should I say education? Thank you. It's from translator. Gentlemen, did you get the translation? 1, 2. Did you get the translation? Gentlemen. English is channel number 7. English channel number 7. Who would be willing to answer?
bit relaxed, so maybe I missed part of the question. However, my understanding is the following one. We're discussing today whether educational business schools and corporate universities bring proper knowledge, skills, etc., provide proper abilities of management. However, what do you think about another format of education when we just invite trainers, coaches, professors to our enterprise, and they are sort of teaching inside the shop within some small projects, when you are combining practice and theory at one place?
Благодарю.
Thank you.
Please.
The translator is very expensive, I guess.
Let me say I'm a big supporter of in-company trainers. I think education requires a continuum. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face in homogenization is trying to push everyone to be the same. I think we need universities. We need universities that are more research-oriented. We need universities that are more teaching-oriented. We need training centers. We need in-company experiences by working professionals. What concerns me, if I use an illustration in my own university, is I think when we bring adjunct faculty to our universities, we should bring them precisely because they are not academic faculty. We shouldn't bring them in as poor, cheap cousins of academic faculty. We bring them in because they have a different skill set. So the concern that I have with adjuncts is when we turn around and say, as universities, adjuncts are a cheap way of teaching foundation courses. That's not what adjuncts are there for. To me, in a management education in a business school, adjuncts come because they bring that real-world insight into the classroom. To students who've spent time studying under an idiot like me, who hasn't spent enough time in the real world, has taught them a whole lot of theory that the students then throw at the adjunct. How do students learn? By going to an adjunct and saying, Mike Page says X, and having the adjunct say, clearly Mike Page has never worked in the real world because this is why it won't work in this context. And I think it's both of those that educate the student. So I think in-company training is appropriate. I think the problem with in-company training is when efficiency swamps what you're trying to achieve. And to me, the most insightful companies that I see, and one that springs to mind with me recently, is ING in the Netherlands. They are doing some amazing work in my mind where they're doing stuff in company with senior personnel, with outside agencies, and they're also engaging with universities in other ways, in this case with the Rotterdam School of Management, and they're doing a lot of stuff in gender transformation of that particular institution. And I think this is a very successful, good marriage.
All right, now we have the gentleman at the back.
Yeah, okay, thank you. My name is Yaroslav Pavlov.
Меня зовут Ярослав Павлов. Я директор программ в IBS, в РАНЭПа, директор программ дистанционного образования. Спасибо большое за ваше выступление. И мне хотелось бы обратиться к одному из неоднозначных для меня вопросов.
Problem today, the problem connected to managing expectations and ethical marketing of business education. In general, I see that many business schools, because of understandable reasons, try to say that we can provide skills, can teach how to manage. And exactly as Professor Page said, that it is impossible to teach how to manage, it is possible to learn management. And shouldn't we deal as a community of business schools, as a community of business education, shouldn't we deal with the problem of the ethical marketing of business education? So this is a question to all the experts. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Who would like to talk about ethical marketing?
Well, I'll just make a couple of comments. We have my colleague Andrew Main Wilson is here from AMBA. We have some extraordinary organizations globally that set certain operational standards and expectations particularly for schools of business, that include a very strong ethical component. We do the same thing. There are many other organizations that do that. Our challenge is to make a broader community aware of these, particularly the corporate community, to know that there are organizations establishing standards there that acknowledge the importance of doing things in an ethical, appropriate, a proper manner, if you will. But it's a big world. And so inevitably there are lots of, as Mike mentioned, 15, 18, 20,000 plus programs out there. It's very challenging to communicate broadly about these standards. And so programs like this are important, to have successful participants in one talk to their colleagues, talk to others, and explain. But you raise a very, very important question. The only good thing about corporate education and ethical components and the value, if it's not successful, it goes away. You know, the market is very unforgiving in that regard. Good question.
Maybe just to add a little bit to that, the first thing, a little bit of a plug to my own institution. We run a program called the GAD5 program that we've been running now for 20 years, where we get all our faculty, just about a high percentage of our faculty have gone through this program, which is an intensive program about how do you bring ethics into whatever you teach. So, I think, and we also have a lot of international visitors who join this GAD5 program that we offer. I think one of the things that we have to do more of in our business schools is firstly think about what we mean about teaching ethics. And I think to me, teaching ethical behavior is about getting our students to understand that many decisions that they make have ethical dimensions, and they need to think about those ethical dimensions. That is different to me trying to impose my ethics on a student. And I think that's fraught, because my ethics are as much a product of my culture and my experience as anyone else's, and no doubt there are enormous holes in them. So it's really about getting students and giving students experience in seeing problems, working with case studies, visiting companies, and seeing at the level of their decision making that the choices they make have consequences and they need to think seriously about them. One of the challenges, I think, that the ethical dilemmas we faced recently when they surface as these macro issues is we start writing cases about macro level failures of ethics, whether that's Enron or WorldCom or whatever. And then we go along to an undergrad or a freshly minted master's student and say, well, if you're the CEO or the chief financial officer of this world mammoth corporation called Enron, and you were confronted with this decision, would you have made it? Well, the answer is easy. No, of course I wouldn't. Because you're leapfrogging from where you are today into a position that is so far from your ken or your knowledge that you don't understand it. I wonder how many ethical failures of mammoth proportion don't happen incrementally through an individual's career, where as you build your career, you take a shortcut, and then you take another shortcut, and then you wake up and you're 60 years of age heading a corporation, and you made one major disastrous decision, and you wake up one day and say, how the hell did I come up with that? Our role as business schools, and I think the bigger role we can play, is by getting young people in the areas where they're operating to understand the ethical side of their decisions and to make it a conscious part, whether they're making a finance decision, a human resources decision, an operations decision, or whatever. Think about the ethical dimensions and then act. Will they act wrong? Sometimes, yes. But I believe that will skill them to think about ethics as they build their careers in a way that's very different.
Good.
Right. Your one doesn't go on.
Well, you have to. We've got it now. Right. Well, ever mindful of your comfort, we're going to have a short break now to allow you to network and do whatever else may be necessary. But just before that, Sergey wants to just say a few words, but when he finishes, you can get up and do what you like.
Уважаемые коллеги, спасибо вам за внимание. Наша секция не...
Dear colleagues, thank you for your attention. Now we're going to have a break for 15 minutes and we will continue. We will have some fantastic presentations from very impressive people. We had the academic presentations mostly, but then we will have the presentations from the very well-known investment companies, from the retail owners, from the Bell company, and the author of a very, very famous book about what kind of managers of international corporations we all want to have. And the executive director of AMBA International will also make a presentation. We will continue our discussion on from the other side on how business views the business education. Well, enjoy your break.